All right, and I believe we are live. I joined a little bit live, a little bit earlier for the folks to give the folks a chance to dive in and join us here. And so I'll just double check the stream here to make sure that it's working for us. But if you're on the live stream right now, come on in, take a seat and relax. We are about to get started in just a few minutes. Marcus will be right back. Come on in, folks. Welcome to the first live session that I've been on for quite a while, I would say. Haven't really done a live session in quite a while, so um, I hope you are able to see us. I hope you are able to hear us. Um, oh, yep. Okay, so I see the comments on LinkedIn here. So Susan says, great team. You two are okay. Glad. It seems like the comments are coming in. Let's just double check to make sure. It's the first time I've done a LinkedIn live session in a long, long time, folks. So let's just see if we have everything up and running. We are early. We will get started in a couple of minutes. Hey, Marcus, welcome back. How are you doing?
Hi, good. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I'll get the stuff off of my screen for a second just so we can have a we'll have a quick little meet and greet before we dive in. But welcome. It's been a while since I've seen you. How you been?
Been a while. Not too bad. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I was kind of stressed out for the last couple of months there because I was on my last client engagement there, and that last project was pretty tough. So it decided to take a month off and just do some traveling. But now we're back for our first live session for God knows I can't even remember the last time I did a live session, but glad to be back. Glad to be back. Let me see if we're seeing any of the
Great.
folks here. Let me just double check to make sure our stream is working. I'm not seeing any comments here. Let's just double check. Okay, yep, okay. Thank you for the invite. Let us know where you're coming from, folks. Welcome. Welcome. I do see that it's working on LinkedIn now. Let us know where you're dialing in from. And as we wait for the folks to join the stream, we are gonna kind of see where our profession is spread across here because we are a gigantic profession and we are a very, very global profession. So let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. Um, I do see a comment here. Let's just double check the comments on our LinkedIn. Let's just double check our comments on our YouTube channel here. A person says, why was it so tough on our YouTube channel? The reason why it was so tough, I'm going to get into in a lot more detail on Saturday. But if I was to sum it up for you, I'd say that it was tough because there was a lot of complexity in the project itself, and it was tough mostly because I was thrown into the project halfway through, which always makes projects tough. When you don't get to start right from the beginning of a project, you have a lot of catch up to play in the middle of the project, and playing catch up when things are in motion, it is so hard to do. So hopefully that answers your question for why it was tough. I will keep an eye on our LinkedIn as well to see if there are any questions that are popping up here. All right, so I think we can get started. Marcus, what
Let's
do you
do it.
think?
Let's
Yeah,
do it.
you're
Yeah, I
good.
think we should. I think we should just get down to it.
All right, all right. Well, let me just share my screen here so we can talk a little bit about what's on the agenda, and then we're going to dive into a conversation which I hope the folks are going to learn a lot from today. So on the screen, folks, you're going to see our agenda here. All right, and we're going to keep it tight. We're going to keep it slim, and we're going to try to answer those questions for you as quickly as possible. We'll start off by doing some brief intros about who we are and why we are here. And then we're going to dive straight into question number one that we have here, which is surrounding what it actually means to be a BA consultant. There are a lot of other different definitions of BA consulting that exist out there, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then what Marcus and I will do over here in question number two is talk about why we decided to get into consulting. And we all have our own reasons. We have totally different career trajectories, so you'll get to hear a little bit about that. And then question number three is the question that we're all here to kind of learn and understand, because the whole purpose of this is not for us to push you into BA consulting or anything like that. It's to kind of give you a realistic understanding of what BA consulting actually is, so that you can make the right decision for yourself when it comes to your own career development, essentially. All right. At the end of all of this, we are also going to give you a special little present, so stick around for that, and we'll get to that after we have the conversation. Throughout the conversation, if you have any questions for us, just keep on throwing them into the chat, because what we'll do in the last 15-20 minutes or so is that we'll go back, we'll open up our chat, we'll just start answering questions and taking your comments. All right, and so hopefully that sounds good. And I see the questions coming in. Lots of questions coming into our YouTube channel and inside of our LinkedIn Live. We're multi-living here, so we have some folks coming in from Calgary, got some folks coming in from Ottawa, we got some folks coming in from Nigeria, and looks like we have folks coming in from dialing in from all over the world. Okay, all right, so let's just get started. So Marcus, I'm wondering, do you want to introduce yourself first, or should I go first? What do you think?
Go ahead. Go ahead. You might as well intro yourself.
Okay, I'll give everybody a brief intro to my own career and when and why I started consulting, just by kind of going through this little visual that we have here. And so, if you were to peel back my career and really just kind of look at it big picture wise, I started my career, my business analysis career, over here in the year 2000, but I didn't actually start doing BA work at the time. That's when I started studying to become a BA. All right. And so I call that my foundational stage, because what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to learn everything that I need to become a BA. By 2005, I had entered what I like to call the competency stage of my BA career. And what that essentially is I'm finished my education, I've jumped into my first job, and what I'm trying to do now at this stage is I'm trying to build out my skills as best as I can. All right. So that was started off in 2005, and it went from 2005 to about 2012. And this is what we're here to talk about today, folks. 2012 is the year that I decided to quit my full-time permanent business analysis job and to dive into independent freelance business analysis consulting. So I started a consulting firm called Bariali Consulting, which is essentially my name, because I intend to be an independent freelance consultant. I started that in 2012, and I'm sure we're going to get into a conversation as to why I started it, but that's essentially what I've been doing until about today, which I like to call kind of the legacy stage of my career. And we can get into the details of that, but I've essentially been doing this since 2005, started studying for it in the year 2000, and we're now at 2025. So it's basically been 2 decades that I've been here. Big picture view, but between starting to study and when I actually took the leap into BA consulting, it was about 12 years. How about you, Marcus? Oh, you're on mute, by the way.
I'm unmuted. There we go. Just I want to make sure everyone understands. I don't have my background image. I did have my background image, but apparently it's all about power on my laptop, and this application took out the background and said I can't do it for now. So anyhow, that said, how did I get into BA consulting? Essentially, I have a different path. I think what Emal did was he has a nicely planned out career, and a lot of us do that, but many of us don't. And I jumped into it kind of accidentally. I didn't want to go into that. I actually wanted to go into teaching English. And it was my last year of university that I had an IT job. I was fooling around with IT. I was part of the computer science club in university, so that kind of got me into it as a hobby. And when I graduated, I decided when I graduated from my BA degree at McMaster University in Hamilton, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go do this full force. By this time, I was restructuring my career. I decided to go and study computer networking. It was a college diploma at Seneca Polytechnic. And midway, about 1 year through that, I was lucky enough to get a job at IBM at Steeles and Pharmacy up in Toronto. And that's the big 3600 Steeles office. And I worked as a BA. If it wasn't for that job, I wouldn't have had my introduction to business analysis. And so here I was going to school and while working at the same time. And as soon as I graduated, I was lucky enough to get a teaching job at Seneca. I worked there for 5 years teaching programming courses, three different programming courses. So that really gave me, I think, a good boots on the ground introduction to business analysis, and it enabled me to learn a bit more, both on the job and on my own outside. I think really the big impetus is if you want to learn anything, and Einstein said this, if you want time on your hands, get a government job. And that's exactly what I did. I worked at the University of Toronto for 5 years, and believe me, I had a lot of time to learn a lot of things.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So you
it's a
did
nine
that.
to five.
If
You
and
don't
for
have
the
to do
folks
extra
listening,
stuff.
sorry to cut you off. For the folks listening, if you look at Marcus's profile, you'll see all of the jobs that he's done basically as a full timer all throughout between this point where he's entered his competency stage where he entered in very early and when he actually dove into BA consulting. So sorry to cut you off there, Marcus, but I just wanted to
Nope.
highlight that you've got a ton of experience that doesn't show up on the picture here.
Yeah, yeah. And I think just to jump forward to present day, it was I saw people doing consulting work. I have a friend who owns a consulting company here in Calgary, and he tried to convince me to get into it. I thought he was crazy. And it wasn't until I saw some colleagues going into it, making some big bucks, I thought around 2015, this is for me. I got to go on this path. So
Okay, okay. So
uh,
that gives us a bit of a preview as to the reasons why you made the jump, and I'll ask you a couple more questions about that when we get to that when we get to that question. But yeah, thank you for that great introduction, Marcus. So that's kind of a little bit of about us. Let's talk a little bit about maybe what it means to actually be a business analysis consultant, because I don't think maybe everybody knows what it means to be a BA consultant, right? There are consultants that, let's say the big consulting companies out there, the big 4 or 5, the Deloittes, the KPMGs, the Accentures out there, and business analysts get into that type of consulting. And technically speaking, you're also a consultant there, but that's not the type of consulting we're talking about. We're talking about you have learned all of the skills that you need, and what you're doing is you're actually starting your own consulting practice. So you're not going to work for one of the big 4 or some other consulting company as a permanent employee. What you're doing is you're actually changing the nature of your relationship with your employer from an employee-employer relationship to becoming a contractor and having a client contractor relationship. That's essentially what we're talking about here today. And so I don't know, Marcus, I've kind of laid out a couple of basic principles here on the factors that I think are involved in making that transition, just so the folks kind of understand what they're getting themselves into if they feel like that this is the right path for them. What do you think? Do I have a good, clear picture here of what the difference is at a high level between an employee and a contractor?
I think you do. And the big thing really is monetary. Monetary changes. It's a huge difference between being a full-time paid employee with benefits versus being an independent contractor or consultant where you're paid by the hour.
Yeah.
I think that makes a huge difference. I mean, taxes are different too, but we won't get into that.
Yeah, yeah, and and it can get a little bit complicated, but at a 10,000 foot view, essentially what I'm looking at here is I kind of think about making that transition. So when I was making the transition in my career, these are really the main four factors, right? I was thinking about job security. What is going to happen to my job? Because as an employee, okay, I have a job. I don't have to keep on looking for work all the time. There's a lot of protections with being a full-time permanent employee that I would not have gotten when I got into a contractor position. So, in terms of job security, I've always thought of it as if you're an employee, you have a lot more job security, and that can be debatable, but we'll park that conversation for another conversation for another chat. But you're guaranteed that anytime you make the switch from an employee to contractor, you're guaranteed to have less job security as a contractor than whatever it is that you had over here as an employee. Okay, so that's kind of one downside of becoming a contractor. The pay that you mentioned here, very important because one of my personal motivators, right, was because I had known that employees make less and contractors make more. Financial planning was always another subject that was in the back of my mind because as an employee, I have employer contributions, right? So my employer at the time, when I was a full-time employee, they were kind of contributing to my pension. They had investment advisors that were available to help me make my investment decisions, etc. And that was always in the back of my mind too, because I'm thinking, well, if I want to go from becoming an employee to a contractor, how how am I going to fill that gap, right? Because sorry, these should actually be flipped, but financial planning, I think I messed that one up. No worries, I'm going to
Uh-oh.
fix it right now. This is what business analysts do. This is what business analysts do is when there's a mistake, they fix it right away. So what I'll do there is to say this one is more and this one is actually less. My apologies there, folks. I had kind of gotten that backwards on the presentation that I had. So as a contractor, okay, I have more financial planning support. And as a contractor, I don't have any basically. So I have to figure out how to manage my own pension. Who's going to do that for me? So I got a lot of these other questions I have to think about. The last thing that was always in the back of my mind when I was trying to make the switch was around freedom. I'm a I value my own personal freedom immensely, and it was a major factor because as a permanent employee, you basically have to be at your job when you're needed at your job. Sure, you might have vacations. Sure, you might have um, pay time off for vacations or sick time, etc. But as a contractor, you can say, "Hey, I just don't want to work for 6 months," right? And that level of freedom for time was a huge attractor for me too, because what it allowed me to do is to really take time off and really kind of think through a lot of what it is that I wanted out of my own career. I don't know. How do you feel about this? Do you think that this more or less captures it, or are there any other factors you would add into here for folks to think about as they're trying to make the switch?
Well, I just want to point out what Francisco said in the chat. He says no job is permanent, and that's true. Even full times aren't. But if you're in a unionized environment, if you're in a full-time paid employee environment, there's a certain degree of comfortability, I think, that you may not necessarily have in or have a bit less of as a contractor because you're always thinking about your next contract. If you're a full-timer, you're not really thinking about the next job, or you don't have to a certain degree. You should, but you don't have to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like I said earlier, and I think that's a good point, Francisco. There, the question of job security is a little bit tenuous, but it will, well, and I do have a lot of views on that because there are ways you can actually make yourself a lot more secure in your job. But regardless of how much job security you feel like you have as an employee, you're guaranteed to have less as a contractor. And that's the message I want to kind of get across because even if you don't feel too secure in your job, you're guaranteed to not have job security as a contractor because as a contractor, the minute that they hire you is the minute you know when that contract is ending, right? So that's a guarantee. So that's kind of the difference we're trying to communicate here to the folks to say that yes, job security is maybe a bit of a myth amongst many people, but it is still a relevant concept, and I think it applies to a lot of people's careers.
It does, yeah. I have to
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, and so just looking at the comments here, and again, folks, if you're joined us new, put your comments in the chats. We're going to be going through all of them at the end. And so just make sure you kind of tell us where you're coming from, put your comments into the chat, and we're going to circle back to all of your comments at the end. So I don't know, what do you think, Marcus? You think that that gives them a good idea of what a contractor, of what it takes? Anything else you'd add to that?
It does. I think that's important to note, and it really is a personal choice. Not it's not for everybody. And some people I know have gone from full time to contract or consulting and back again to full time, depending on their personal situation. So, um, you can flip back and forth. You're not stuck in one.
Yeah, true. That's another good point. You can sometimes take a dip into contracting, and if it doesn't work out, flip back. You're never really stuck in that situation. So may hopefully that's a bit of a hopefully that's a bit of comfort for the folks who are thinking about taking the leap and are a little bit nervous about it. Nothing is stopping you from going back out of being a contractor into full-time employment. Many people I've known have done that for many different reasons. A lot of times, a lot of contractors I know have done contracting work for, let's say, 5 to 7 years, made their money, saved it up, and then just gone back to a full-time position to kind of take it a little bit more easy and to have a life that's a little bit easier to manage and run and have a little bit more stability in their life. So totally legitimate point, I think there, Marcus. So now, Marcus, I know you kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier, but in your own career, for your own career, how, what would you say is the primary driver that led you from, landing your first role here at IBM, landing a whole bunch of other roles here as a permanent employee, and then finally taking the jump into BA consulting in 2015?
I think it was the fear of the unknown. Fear of the
Okay.
unknown. And I think when we're all fearful, we don't want to change.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing. And not just with consulting, it could also be with growing your BA skill set. Oh, I'm comfortable here. I'm
Yeah.
comfortable. As opposed to, can I become an architect? Yes, you can if you train properly and you put your mind to it.
Yeah. So let me ask you that same question in a different way. You're a permanent employee sitting there, probably working a cushy job, kind of like I was when I was a permanent employee. And then one day you decided, hey, I'm done. What led you to that decision?
Well, I'll be honest, I did a bit of both. I did
Okay.
some full time while I was contracting. Some people do that. They'll double dip or double up. And that way, if you do this for about 6 months, you find out if the contracting doesn't work out for you, you don't like it, you can always leave it. Don't worry, you've got a full time job. But it means you're working extra hours to do that.
Yeah.
Um, you know.
But what made you look into contracting in the first place? Like, were you just not happy in your full-time permanent job, or?
No, I had some relatives who were making big bucks. I mean, they were making that $100 an hour, and I thought, what? When you calculate your full time wage, well, it's a salary, but when you get it down to hourly wage, you find out what I'm only making 45, 50. I mean, yes, you can add benefits to that because you've got Canadian pension plan, you've got your employment insurance, maybe you've got a bonus, all those things add up, but still, it won't surpass maybe an extra $5 an hour, $10 an hour. You're still nowhere near that $100 an hour. And I
Yeah.
thought, how do I get up there? So that was a motivating factor for me.
So the primary driver you'd say for your switch over into BA consulting here was, let me just make this a little bit larger, just for it to have its comedic effect. The biggest contributing factor was money, I would say, right? For you
It
to
was
into making that
the
switch. Yeah,
dinero.
yeah,
It was the
absolutely.
dinero.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are probably not willing to admit when they're, when they're out in the public and really kind of speaking about why it is that they're doing a lot of the things that they're doing. But I think it's important for a lot of folks to know that the difference in income that you can make between being a permanent employee and essentially doing the same type of work as a contractor, that, that can hugely increase your pay. And I would say, Marcus, I'm going to take a bit of a detour to kind of explain the fact that when the time was there for me to make that switch over, that was actually the biggest primary driver that made me want to jump out of my own permanent career here, right? Competent stage, I feel like I had become competent enough. And I think we kind of share that in common because I'd become competent enough and I actually reached a point in my permanent job where I realized that the amount of value that I was providing, I could harvest a lot more income out of the value I was providing. And as a permanent employee, I felt like I'd hit a ceiling because most companies most companies function in a certain way that places ceilings for employees on what they can do. So even if you're a very, very high performing employee, oftentimes what tends to happen in a person's career is that they'll get stuck. They'll be performing at a much higher level than a lot of their peers a lot of times, but because of the way that compensation is structured inside companies, there is only so much higher they can go than the rest of the peers, despite the fact that they might be adding a lot more value than let's say the general group of people that are being compensated there. And so when I was in my full-time job, I thought to myself, well, if I'm able to run projects the way that I've learned how to do during my competence stage here, and I did a lot of projects during my competence stage. It wasn't easy for me to get to the point where I felt like I was doing really, really well. Between 2005 and 2012, money was the primary driver for me too. I'm going to admit it. So I am in the same boat as you. People do though. I know a lot of other contractors oftentimes won't even do it just for the money. They'll do it for the time freedom. They say, you know what, I just want to work 6 to 8 months a year, and I need a lot of time off for whatever it is that I want to do in my life. And oftentimes that becomes the primary driver for some people, but it seems to me like for you and I, it seems like we're basically we're driven essentially by the bags of money that are waiting for us on the other side of things. And folks, I joke about that, but I went into close to $100,000 in debt to get myself educated. So for me, the money focus was really important because I was in a lot of debt when I first started my career, and even around 2012, I still had debt to pay off, right? And so I know I jokingly kind of put this money bags face here, but realistically, I was essentially just trying to figure out how do I pay off all of the student debts that I've accumulated in the past, 6 years that I've been studying quickly so that I can start to build a life for myself. And so that was a primary driver, all jokes aside. So I think we kind of have that in common. Was there anything else? Was there anything else about any of these elements here that attracted you to diving into freelance consulting?
Well, I think some people will say, "Oh, well, I have a family and I want predictable income."
Yeah,
But I'd say if you have a family, shouldn't you want more income? And if that's what you're looking at, then definitely contracting. And also, it's really like running your own business.
hmm
And if you're an entrepreneur, you've got an entrepreneur mindset, that's another reason to jump into it.
yeah,
You have a larger degree of creativity when it comes to determining your future, determining the projects you're on, determining the cadence, the speed at which you run your projects, when you can have time off. You could work, for example, 10 months and take 2 months off a year, or work 8 months and take 4 months off a year, depending
Yeah.
on how much money you've attained on that contract.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's it's good that you mentioned that too because I think the mindset switch for a lot of folks can be hard when they're trying to make because when you're a permanent full-time employee, I think there's a feeling of security there. And you think to yourself, well, I have family obligations, right? Like you mentioned, I have kids to raise, I have mouths to feed, I have, school, education to pay for. So what happens? What happens to my job security? What happens if I can't land another contract? And that's a major question. And that was a huge, huge stressor for me when I was trying to decide to make the jump. That was probably one of the biggest things that kind of held me back is what happens? What happens to my job security, right? If I have less job security, what's going to happen to me if I'm not able to land another contract, let's say for 6 months or a year or something like that happens to me? And that was a real fear. That was a real fear that I had. What I've noticed though, and this is a bit of a tip for folks who come from two income households, oftentimes if you come from two income households, if one of you chooses to go into consulting, it's not as big of a risk for you because you have another income to fall back on for a temporary period of time. Things might get a little bit tough financially, etc., during the transition while you're getting your bearings. But if you're a two-income household and your spouse has health coverage, they have pension coverage, they have all of these other factors that go into making the decision, that lessens the fear a little bit, hopefully for a lot of the folks out there, because you are not you're not the only sole breadwinner in the house, and that means that the impact of you not being able to succeed in that transition, the impact of that is a lot lower too. So just something else for folks to consider that oftentimes when you're employed as a permanent employee, or let's say your spouse is employed as a permanent employee, your spouse's coverage oftentimes covers the whole family. So you
Yes.
don't need to really kind of double up, and you now have a little bit more freedom, and you can take a little bit more risk with your career if you need to. So it's a good segue into that part of the conversation, I would say. So I would say for the folks listening here, first of all, the question I'll ask you folks, and you can put your answers in the chat there, and we'll come back to it, though, is that you have clarity on what it means to be an independent freelance BA consultant? Do you have a good idea of what it is, what kind of trade-offs you're starting to make when it comes to job security, when it comes to pay potential, when it comes to planning your retirement, essentially, and when it comes to having a certain level of time and freedom of time to yourself? Okay, so that's a question I have for you. If you don't and you have any follow-up questions, just throw them in the chat. We'll come back to them. We'll come back to them in about 10 minutes.
I was going to mention one other thing, Emil.
Yeah,
Sometimes if your contract, because essentially you're incorporated, in the States they call it LLC.
yeah,
But when you are incorporated, you are a company. You're a corporate entity,
yeah,
and so that means you can hire other people. You might be expanding your business, and you might hire your spouse to work for
yeah,
you. And that way you can split your income, and you can have lower incomes for each of you. In other words, you're paying less taxes. That's
yeah,
another story for taxes, but that certainly is an option.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So the options are endless. Okay, and I'm glad you kind of brought that up because a lot of people who get into contracting and they incorporate and they start operating in that capacity essentially as a contractor instead of an employee, there are big questions that you have to answer about your legal structure. Okay, and we won't get in deeply into that conversation, but we can kind of help guide you on some of that stuff. We're not legal experts by you know not even close to being legal experts here, but we've gone through the process ourselves and we kind of understand what it takes to do that. But if you wanna if you want to do this, right, what kind of corporation are you going to set up? Are you going to set up an S corp? Are you going to set up an LLC, right? Or if you're in Canada, are you going to set up an incorporation? You're going to get incorporated, or are you going to operate as a sole proprietorship, right? there's a lot of those types of questions you have to answer, and that can get a little bit complex. But your point is well taken that if you form your LLC or if you get incorporated here in Canada, if you form your LLC, you are now a business owner. And there's a lot of extra work that comes with managing and running a business, but also there's a lot of benefits, like Marcus, like you just mentioned here, Marcus, which is, hey, if my maybe I'm landing more contracts than I can handle, and my spouse is also a business analyst, now I'm just going to hire her into my corporation, right? And that can actually give you a lot of benefits in terms of taxes and in terms of a lot of other benefits that you might not necessarily see as a full-time permanent employee. So there's a lot involved in making the switch, and we won't dive into the weeds there. I just want to make sure that folks who are here just kind of have a good sense of what the difference is between these two different working models and whether it's right for them or not. But very, very important point there. Now, I want to kind of shift us over, Marcus, to the main question here. What does it actually take? What does it actually take to survive, but also to thrive in making this transition? Because when you first start out, oftentimes you're in survival mode. Okay, and unfortunately, some contractors, some consultants operate in survival mode for a long, long period of time, and they never actually make it to the point, they never make the transition into the thriving stage of their consulting practice, essentially. So I don't know. Maybe I'll just walk you through my thoughts, and you can help me fill in the gaps and see if there's anything that I missed here. So when I think about my own career, okay, I think about really the first year of when I first started making the transition. So I quit in 2012, and 2012 through all of 2013, it was not easy, right? It was feast or famine mode here, okay? Because client acquisition now becomes one of the things you have to worry about. How are you actually going to get yourself in front of the people who hire contractors? That is not an easy question to answer, okay? And so for the first little while, you kind of have to live in feast or famine mode. And feast or famine mode essentially means is that when there's work, you're living like a king, but when there isn't, you are starving.
Yep.
And you kind of bounce back and forth between these two different modes, but that's you're in survival mode if you stay like that all the time, right? The goal that I try to kind of guide folks towards is to make sure that they get out of the survival mode, get out of the feast and famine mode by working to build a client base and an actual practice. Okay, and an actual practice meaning that you have processes in place that you engage with your clients with, and you're actually maturating outside of just being a contractor into doing actual consulting work. Because there's some consulting skills you have to pick up to be able to go from feast and famine mode into building a good client base and actually having a good engagement process with your clients. Okay, so that's kind of that's probably the biggest thing that struck me. But when it comes to skill wise, when do you know you're ready? When do you know you're ready to make the leap, first of all, into survival mode? But then more importantly, what skills does it take for you to go from survival into thriving? That's another question that I've kind of had going through my mind, and I've had to go through the experience of actually going sometimes beyond just the basic BA skills, right? The core BA skills that allowed me to survive in that market, they weren't the ones that let me thrive. And so I had to take some action to go a little bit beyond business analysis to hit that place where I'm actually thriving and I have a lot of client work coming my way, right? And I'm out of the feast and famine mode here. I am even here in survival mode. Sometimes if you are not able to kind of get beyond the core skills, sometimes I find it can be easy for you to get stuck and hit another ceiling, even though you're a contractor now. and you're making better money than you were as a permanent employee, you might actually hit a ceiling as a contractor too, especially if you're in survival mode. Because if you're in survival mode, there's a lot of things you don't have to be able to just remove all of the limits of how much money you can make as a consultant. And the last so the four that I look at here, so we said the skills, we said client acquisition I started with, our hourly rates, right? We want to try to remove all the limits, and the very last factor here is job satisfaction, okay? Because when you're in survival mode here, okay, the survival mode, you are forced to take any job and every job that pops up. Maybe type of work you don't want to do. It may be type of work you find stressful. It may be types of projects that are not going to help you land future clients, right? There's a lot of work that exists in the consulting space here, contracting consulting space, and not all of that work is going to give you a level of job satisfaction that you want out of it, right? And again, if you're in survival mode, you don't really have a choice. So the way that I kind of think about it is, what does it take to thrive in a BA consulting role is to kind of get yourself out of that place of scarcity to be able to take on the types of work that you love to do. Okay. And so earlier when we were up here, right, when I was talking a little bit about my career, I had this little note here where I said I felt like I hit the top of the business analysis profession. And the reason why I felt that way, right? I had a couple of measures that I looked at to I'd essentially set some goals for myself in 2012 when I first started, and it was by the end of about 2018 when I satisfied all those goals, right? I had some income goals, okay? I wanted a certain amount of money, a certain hourly fee that I could charge. I wanted to make sure that I don't have to worry about business development. I wanted the contracts to come to me instead of me having to constantly be in feast or famine mode. And very, very importantly, I wanted to be able to choose the types of projects that I want to work on. And that is really important to me too, because I love doing the work, but I don't love all aspects of business analysis. And there are certain things I'd rather be doing than not be doing. So the reason why I feel like I've kind of hit the top of the profession is that I was able to kind of get myself on all three of those measures that I had set for myself in 2012. I'd gotten myself to the right income spot that I wanted. I had a lot of work coming in, more work oftentimes than I can handle on my own. And then I got to choose the types of jobs that I wanted to do. And that's kind of the state that I'm in now. I just finished a client engagement like we were talking earlier, just before we joined. Just finished a client engagement. Hey, the first 9 months of that client engagement went very smoothly. The last 3 or 4 months stressed me out because I got onto a project midway. And I'll tell you, that stress is worth it for me. I don't mind that stress, right? Because that's what kind of hardens me to become a better professional. And so even though it was very stressful, I would say, a relatively good job. Hopefully my clients agree. But it did wear me out. And I did have to take a full month off and just travel up to the Arctic Ocean and just take it easy, go and see beautiful British Columbia, right? So that's kind of what the life of a consultant kind of looks like. And so in my career, that's kind of the trajectory it's taken. That's kind of where we're at right now. And I know that we're probably about, wow, we're 45 minutes in. Maybe, what do you say? We take a couple of questions from the audience here?
Sure. And I just was going to say, as far as the questions go, we have Lily, I think it's Lily or Ilik, has says that it's easier to land jobs from contract interviews versus employee interviews. And I think that really varies. Each person's different.
Yeah.
What do you think of that,
Okay, let me think that through. Like, do you mind repeating that one more time so I
Is
can
it
think
easier to
through it?
land jobs from contract interviews or full-time employee interviews?
I would say contract interviews for me personally are a little bit easier, and I would say that there's a real reason behind that. When an employer is hiring you as a contractor, okay, they know that if you don't work out, that they can just let you go. So that's one of the downside of being a contractor is that you don't have any real employee protections. You're not an employee, right? Typically, when it comes time to letting employees go at a company, there's a whole process that they have to go through. But because it's so easy to get rid of a contractor, oftentimes the interview will be oftentimes be a little bit easier. Okay? They want the right person, but if they know that you're coming on as a contract and if they know that you don't work out at that company, all they have to do is just terminate your contract. Okay? And if they terminate your contract, you're done. You don't have any recourse. You don't get to say, "Oh, what about my employee rights?" You don't have any employee rights as a contractor
No,
because you're not an employee.
no,
And so
that's right.
I think it's a good question. It gets to the heart of what it actually means to be a consultant. Yeah, your interview might be a
Agreed.
little bit easier, but
But
but if you don't work out, your exit's going to be a lot easier too for them to make happen essentially. So it's a double-edged sword in that way.
Francisco was asking about some skills, and I know, Emal, you mentioned core skills that you need as a BA. Francisco's listed as a few of these skills, for example, SQL, data analytics, reporting creation, facilitating meetings, agile. And there's a whole, I say at least obviously you need the foundational skills first
Yeah.
and a few other skills because in a sense you're project managing your own career. So you have to have an understanding, you have this advisory skill set that you need for your clients. That can come a bit later on.
Yeah.
You're working on different projects, so you have to understand how projects run usually. But certainly those skills listed by Francisco are some of those core skills. Anything you want to add, Emil?
Yeah, when it comes to skills development, I mean, you and I both teach, right, Marcus? So we kind of have a good idea of what skills development plans look like and should look like. Maybe we can take that offline for another one, but there is a core skill set that you're going to need to be able to become a contractor, depending on the type of contractor you want to become. I would say that if I was to summarize it, I would say that you should be able to execute a project end to end, which means that if somebody brings you on, you should be able to essentially help your customers figure out what the true business need is, whatever skills you need to do that. Oftentimes it's BRD skills, sometimes it goes beyond that. You should be able to manage product backlogs. Okay, that's an important aspect of being on agile projects is that oftentimes the analyst is the person who has to populate the product backlog and they have to manage the product backlog. Okay, you should be able to do that. You should be able to learn how to elaborate your requirements, okay, using things like your user stories, your use case formats, your wireframes, if you are on a custom built project, you have to learn how to do data modeling properly. You may have to do a little bit of data migration. So SQL itself, I would park in the back unless you're becoming a systems analyst who's going to be in the weeds all the time on custom built systems. I would park SQL to the back burner, and I would be focusing on those skills that I just mentioned there. And we can probably have another live session and talk more specifically about skills and why we need them. But let's park that for now. What I've
Okay.
done here is I'm just going to quickly scan through all of the comments that we got in our LinkedIn here, and I'm going to see if we have any questions that have popped up. Do you have any questions that you're seeing, Marcus, that you wanna raise?
I think one big thing here is Uche has asked, most concerned as an independent contractor, how do I keep up with understanding business operations and industry trends? I was just going to add to that before you say anything, Emal. Emal has a great video on the BA Blocks YouTube channel about how to use ChatGPT to research domains. So that's one start. Emal?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up because I forgot we even did that video. So, yeah, researching domains, I think that domain knowledge really doesn't change a whole lot over time. And so if you commit yourself to one domain, and we're kind of getting into career strategy here, right? But if you commit yourself to one domain, the ways that you keep up is by joining the industry associations for the domains that you're involved in. So for example, if you're interested in getting into the insurance domain, well, there's an industry association for insurance that teaches that they where they hold uh, sessions where they do research, where they, and there are a lot of these types of industry associations, not related to business analysis, but related to the domain, right? The banking domain has a bunch of industry associations. I mean, almost any domain that you can think of, capital markets, if you get into like doing things like mutual funds, or if you get into oil and gas, right? There's industry associations that are constantly the kind of like a hive mind of knowledge that is on the bleeding edge of what's happening in industry. You got to stay connected to those things, and that's probably the best way. Also, now that we have AI, you can just ask AI and it'll give you a really good, thorough overview of what's actually happening inside of your industry and what's coming up. So I would do a combination of both of those things to answer that one.
Great.
So
I was going to mention also, we have, I think it's Sida had asked, how many years experience do you need to become a contractor? He asks, is it 4 years? I'm just noticing you've got Vanessa Moore's comment in front here, and she said, after a year and a half working as a BA, I went into contracting. I had to. So
wow,
there's different time frames for everyone depending on your
yeah.
skill set. Email?
You know what, Marcus? I think we should have Vanessa on the next chat.
Yeah.
Hey, Vanessa, love to have you join us on the next chat. Maybe you can share some of your experiences. But good, the point there being is that you can see that Marcus's career trajectory took a very different path than mine, right? So if I was to kind of clear out the board here, let's get this money bags out of the way. Marcus started his education, right? And he went straight into his competence phase and then spent 15 years doing that and teaching before he jumped into consulting. Okay. Me, my career took a completely different trajectory because I did all my education up front, right? So in my career, I did a ton of education. Then I jumped into my competence stage as a permanent employee. And it took me about 8 years, right, to make the leap. Now, Vanessa and perhaps some other folks did it way more quickly, right? And every person has a different really kind of trajectory that their career takes. The thing that I would say there is that you have a sense, right? What the way I would make that decision is you should look at these factors and think to yourself, am I ready? Am I ready to have less job security and do more business development? And you'll know that answer for yourself. Okay? Because if the answer is no, you may want to spend another year or two. In my own personal career, what I wanted to do was, you can see my career is very, very linear compared to most business analysts out there, right? What did I do? You can see I like to batch everything together, all right? I batched together most of my education over these 3 years because I wanted a solid foundation, right? I batched together all of big chunk of my skills development here, okay? When I was a full-time permanent employee at my competency stage, I volunteered for the toughest projects, okay? Every single time because I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to batch it, process that, and learn. When I hit my monetization stage, I have was totally confident that I can basically do almost any type of project. So I took my time to get there. A lot of folks say, you know what? I don't need to learn how to do every type of project. I just want to start making money right now, and they're going to dive into it and try to survive. And those types of folks tend to live in the I would say that they live in the famine stage a lot longer than I did. So my famine stage was very, very short, but it's because I built out my educational foundation. I built out my skills, my competence foundation, and I spent only about a year in that famine stage. After which work started coming to me. Okay, if you spend less time educating yourself, less time building competency, you may spend a lot more time in your famine stage. So you got to kind of make that judgment call for for yourself, I would say. Okay, and everybody kind of has a different sense of how that works. Hopefully that answers the question. I don't know. Does that kind
I was
of
I was going to add to that email too. I think the way that you planned it out, I think it makes it gives you time to digest a lot of information. and learn it, internalize it. If you're thrown into a project and you don't know what you're doing, you can get you can be very lost. Some people can capture that all that information at once and digest it. If you're young and your brain is working fast and you've got an aptitude for this type of stuff, great. But those are few and far between. I think you should plan it out from the beginning. Get your core skills learned, like Emal did, and then go off, because then you the chances of you falling back are less, are slim. I went. You can see my trajectory, but I went through a lot of big learning curves, a lot of ups and downs, and I'm sure Emal did too. It's just that once you get those core skills, I think it's so much easier to just fly higher. Um, I did a lot of ups and downs, and I don't know if
Yeah.
everyone else wants to do the same.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned that because I just pulled up a LinkedIn post that I'd made a while back ago. Let me put that up here for everybody to take a look at. Look, I have become a master at taking all of these customer problems that get thrown at me right in the first 2 weeks of my client engagement and just swallowing them, right? I just down it all and I don't let any of it escape. Okay. But the reason why I'm capable of doing that is just because I have taken things one step at a time. If you can master all of these problems that hit you at once, okay, when you first joined in your first client engagement, I would say maybe you can do it earlier. It took me a long time. I'm a very methodical thinker about almost everything in my life. I think very, very methodically. A lot of other people are comfortable taking risks way easier, way more earlier in their lives. And again, you kind of have to kind of measure your own risk tolerance. To me, I was taught from a very young age, hey, just do something once, but do it right. And that has been my life philosophy for all my life. And I say, hey, look, if I'm going to get educated, I'm going to get educated properly. And so that's what I did. And I said, when I'm going to build my skills, I'm going to build my skills properly. But when I'm going to monetize, I'm going to monetize properly. All right. And so I basically have gone through those stages in a pretty clean way. You kind of have to, I think everybody has to kind of sense out what their tolerance is because a lot of people say, you know what, I'm just gonna try to monetize as quickly as possible and figure the rest of it out, right? And if that's your mindset, hey, dive in and see if you can pull it off. And if not, at least you'll learn some lessons, and then you'll be able to come back to it the next time with, you kind of take a bit of an iterative approach. My approach has been waterfall. Let's just put it that way, right? You take an agile approach, just dive right in and see if you can survive. And if you can't, hey, come back and add a little bit of methodical sequencing to it if it doesn't work out for you. So you have options basically on how you want to tackle that.
So I think
All
that's
right.
important. And I
I'm
was going
seeing
to
that we
say,
only have 3 minutes left,
yeah, I was
Marcus.
going to say, I know we're coming up to time, so there's something that you want to announce.
Yes, for the good folks who have joined us here live, what I would say is that thank you, first of all, for joining us. Lots of great questions, and we are going to go through the questions. I am going to kind of harvest them. We'll probably do another live session sometime in the near future. But what I plan on doing on Saturday is I plan on actually speaking among some of my most esteemed colleagues here. Okay, these folks here are some of the smartest people that you'll find in the BA space. But my talk here is going to kind of continue from what we've talked about here because I'm actually going to do a deep dive into the 4 projects that I did in my last client engagement that just ended. I'm going to talk about, hey, what did I do well? Where can I improve for the next time? Okay, that's my talk. Marcus, you're there for sure. And then we have our friend Bola is there. Maria's going to be there. David's going to be there. Yulia, I'm a big fan of Yulia as well, by the way. Lissandro's going to be there. Banu's going to be there. Michael's going to be there. And our friend James Dean is going to be there. Okay, so we're all going to be, it's a 1 day event. And what we'd like to do is to offer you a 10% discount on that if you intend on joining us. If you do, this is the promo code. I think that is going to be till 4 p.m. today. So if you want to join us on Saturday, you can get a 10% discount if you sign up by 4 p.m. today. Just make sure that you punch in the code BA Unplugged promo or click on this link. I'll put the link in. I'll add the link into our comments there in
I was
on
going to say
LinkedIn.
that's also 4 p.m. Eastern time. So if any,
4 p.m. Eastern time. Yeah, I'm in Toronto, so we kind of aimed at that price. But I would say if you have the time on Saturday, very, very worthwhile event because a lot of those folks have a lot of really good knowledge to share. And I'll just be continuing this conversation just by doing a bit of a retrospective on the last client engagement that I did. So you kind of get to learn about the types of projects that I do now at this stage of my career as a consultant. And you'll see, look, I even at this stage in my career, I still make mistakes and I still am learning as I go. I don't think the learning ever stops. So I'll share that full retrospective with you and I'll share some tips on what I would do differently the next time I'm confronted by the same type of project that I did. So um, hopefully you have a chance and you have the time to join us and if you choose to join us, sign up for within the next 3 hours or so, you can get a 10% discount on that. So I just wanted to put that out there. We are exactly at time, Marcus.
we are.
I
One
want to
one
thank.
last thing. One last
Yeah,
thing. I was just going to add for those who have IIB certifications or want to renew them, we are giving out 13 CDUs, professional development units. That is, I think it's 6 hours or 6 hours of recording and 7 live hours. So 13 CDUs is huge for some of those people who want to certify or recertify rather.
glad you mentioned it. um, I want to thank everybody for being here. I hope you've learned something. I really appreciate you joining me on this one, Marcus. I know you got a lot going on, so I don't want to take any more of your time than I have to. But I really appreciate everybody being here. Hopefully you'll join us. If not, you can look forward to our next live session. We'll figure out when that is. We don't know when that is yet, but if you can't wait, join us on Saturday. That's kind of where we're gonna have a bit of a round table and do a bunch of other things as well. So take care, everybody. We'll hopefully see you on the next one.
Definitely. Take care, everyone.